So go on the money, you're going to talk us through what?
Green shoots. Remember when Norman Lamont talked about green shoots and he was derided? But I tell you what, he was right, because soon after he said that, back in the early 90s, the economy did actually start to recover. And that's what we're seeing now, I think. I've said for a long time, the Bank of England in particular, the Treasury, the Office of Budget Responsibility, all of them, they've been far too gloomy about the UK economy, in my view. They've underestimated the resilience of the UK economy, and that's what we're seeing now in the GDP numbers which came out this morning. I've got a graphic, and GBNews radio listeners can bear with me. You can see there, in December 2022, GDP, the sum total of all transactions in the economy in December, fell by 0.5% compared to the same month the year before, and in January it actually grew by 0.3%, confounding the expectations of almost all economists. Almost all economists.
But not our GBNews.
Indeed.
One.
And if we break it down a little bit more, I've got another graphic. We see that the services sector, which accounts for a huge swathe of the economy, about 80%, customer-facing services, they grew by 0.3%. Transport and storage up 1.6%, largely because we had fewer strikes in January than we had in December. But then you see production, industrial production, that fell by 0.3%. A lot of firms still struggling with those energy bills. And construction, lots of infrastructure projects being delayed, again, because of logistics issues, that fell by 1.7%. But look, overall, ahead of the budget on Wednesday, which I know you're thinking about a lot, I'm thinking about a lot, you got your interview with the Chancellor coming out this weekend. But this is good news, and this means there should be more tax revenue than we thought before. We know the energy price cap is costing less than before. We know because there is more growth and more revenue, the government's borrowing a lot less, it's paying a lot less in debt interest. There is some fiscal headroom, and that's why the Chancellor is going to come under a lot of pressure from MPs like yourselves to not go ahead with this rise in corporation tax.
I mean, do you think that the Chancellor will say, well, look, this does give me some headroom, I can make some less unpopular decisions than I might otherwise have been forced to do? Or will he say, well, look, this shows that my plan's working, and therefore we're going to carry on as we've already planned? Which way do you think he'll go
I think both ways can be technically justified. You can create sort of an economic narrative that both ways are the right way to go. This really comes down to personality, and it comes down to the instincts of Rishi Sunak, former Chancellor, of course, and today's Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. I think you could put forward a much more credible narrative. Look, the economy's done better than we thought. We've stabilised financial markets. There is a lot more fiscal headroom. And why should we go ahead with the first increase in corporation tax from 19 to 25%, which is already in law, it's due to come in April? The first increase in corporation tax for 50 years. Do you really want to do that when the economy is struggling to get going? It's showing signs of life. Why trample on those green shoots?
And I have to tell you, we put those points to Jeremy, and on Saturday morning he'll be answering it. And I think, you know, that is key. And I looked at those figures there, the minus 1.7 for construction.
There. Well, you know the construction sector well, right?
And you were talking there, is that why they're sort of lowering the limits and allowing more people in? Because actually they need it. We were looking at that yesterday, weren't you? We were looking at the jobs figures and who we were bringing into the country, and construction was now on the list.
They may broaden the specialist visa category to include construction workers. I personally think a lot of houses aren't being built because the big house builders are deliberately building them slowly. That used to be a conspiracy theorist. It's now what a lot of people in government think. And I should say, Esther and Phil, that last weekend I had lunch with a guy called Nigel Lawson, and I'll be writing about that encounter in my Telegraph column this weekend. And he's just turned 90. He's just turning 91. He remains extremely sharp. This is the Chancellor, of course, who cut corporation tax, who cut the top rate of personal income tax, who cut the basic rate of income tax, and the economy grew. He doesn't want corporation tax to go up. He wants the tax burden to be lowered.
Yeah, and what I will say is, having done the negotiating with the Department, with the Treasury, they do keep going right through until Wednesday. So don't think it's set in stone now. So when people are lobbying, when people are talking, when they're getting these figures...
This is when the decisions are made, as you know.
Exactly.
It's all to play for.
And Jeremy Hunt, he should be listening to Liam Halligan. That's
well, it's been said.
That's what
if they don't go through with this rise in corporation tax, they're going to have to admit that Liz Truss had a point. Will they be big enough to do that?
Well, let's hope so.